Hi everyone! In this video, I'm just going to go through two examples of proofs to prove triangles congruent. Now, I would suggest trying them on your own before actually watching the video. And also keep in mind that everybody's proof is going to look a little bit different depending on the order that you write things. So keep that in mind as well. But here's a basic overview. So going to example one, right, we have our given and we have our prove and we have our diagram. So in this one, it asks you to prove two triangles congruent. So when it asks you to prove two triangles congruent, keep in mind the four ways to prove triangles congruent: side, 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 angle, angle, and angle, angle, side. Right? So the first thing that you want to do when given a proof is read the given and label the diagram with whatever you possibly can. So in this particular given, it says that segment OK bisects angle MOT. So just to highlight, segment OK bisects angle MOT, which is this big angle here. Right? For that segment to bisect that angle, if you remember what a bisector is, right? It's a segment that splits this angle into two equal parts. That's going to make angle 1 congruent to angle 2. So that's something you definitely want to label on your diagram. Angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent. The other thing that it tells you in the given is that segment OM is congruent to segment OT. Right? So we can label that as well. Segment OM is congruent to segment OT. Okay? And then segment OK, if you notice, that's going to be called our shared or our common side, which basically just means that segment OK in the left triangle is the same length as it is in the right triangle. So we can label that with two tick marks to show that that's congruent as well. Now that you've labeled the diagram with everything that you know, look at the triangle and decide how you're going to prove them congruent. So I see here a side, an angle, and a side that's congruent to the other side, angle, and side. So the way I'm going to prove these two triangles congruent is by the side, angle, side postulate. Right? So your first statement when writing a proof is always going to be the given. So your first statement is literally going to be the given information, and the reason you're writing that statement is because it's given. So your first step is pretty easy. From that, you're going to want to state that two sides are congruent, two angles are congruent, and then two sides are congruent. So actually, in the given, right here, it already tells you a set of congruent sides. So that's already covered. So I'm going to cross that out just to keep track. The next thing that I'm going to want to show are the angles. And we labeled that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So that's what we'd write. And then you want to just ask yourself, how did I know they were congruent? We knew they were congruent because the given told us that angle MOT was bisected. So the reason we know that is by the definition of an angle bisector. So we just showed that two angles are congruent. The last part is that shared side that we need to say. So we state that segment OK is congruent to segment OK, right? And that's actually going to be the reflexive property of congruence. Now, a silly way I remember that is that when you look in the mirror, it reflects yourself, and the reflexive property is whenever a segment or anything is congruent to itself, right? So we just stated that that third set of sides are congruent, so we've covered that. And now that we've done that, we've actually proved the triangle is congruent by side, angle, side. So that's our last step, right? You literally just state that the triangle MKO is congruent to triangle TKO, and we did that using the side angle side postulate. Okay, so moving on to example 2, you want to follow the same process. So you're going to read the given, label the diagram, and then do your statements and reasons. So in this example, it says that C is the midpoint of segment BD and AE. Right? So if you remember what it means for something to be a midpoint, it's right in the middle, right? So if this is segment BD and C is that midpoint, that's going to mean that segment BC is congruent to segment CD. And the same goes with segment AE, right? If C is the midpoint of that segment, that's going to mean that segment AC is congruent to segment CE. Now, the other thing that you should notice in these two triangles is that we have a set of vertical angles. So we can label this angle and this angle with arcs because we know that vertical angles are congruent. Right? Now, this should be enough information to prove the triangle is congruent, right? Because if you look at what's marked in the diagram, we have a set of congruent sides, angle, and then side. So here we're going to use the side, angle, side postulate. I just like to write that on the side so I can keep track. Now, just as in any proof, the first statement and reason is going to be the given. All right, and now we're going to go through the side, angle, side, and then we'll be finished. Right? So the first set of sides that we're going to show are congruent are BC and CD, the exact things that we just labeled. So your statement is that BC is congruent to CD. And how did we know that? We knew that because the given told us that C is the midpoint. Right? So we really knew that because you knew what a midpoint was. So your reason is going to be the definition of a midpoint. Right? So we just covered that first side. Now the angles that we labeled, remember you can't just say that these are angles C, you have to use all 3 points of that angle. Right? So we're going to say that angle ACB is congruent to angle ECD. So you state that, and how did you know that? You knew that because vertical angles are congruent. So that covers your congruent angles. Cross that out. The last thing that we need to show is the last set of congruent sides. So kind of just like step 2, we have that AC is congruent to CE. And you knew that because that's what a midpoint means. So your reason is definition of a midpoint. So we've done that third side. And now that we've shown all 3 of these, we can say that the 2 triangles are congruent. Right? So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EDC, and we did that using the side angle side postulate. All right, hopefully that helped a little bit, and have a great day. Good job.